Joining us now from Tel Aviv, we're pleased to have Ambassador Dennis Ross, the former special envoy to the Middle East, now a fellow and counselor at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Ambassador Ross, what is your take on whether, excuse me, while I regain my voice, whether Netanyahu was agreeing to something? Was this an Israeli proposal negotiated probably between Bill Burns and David Barnea, the Mossad leader?
No. This was an Israeli proposal that was absolutely adopted by the War Cabinet. This was not something that President Biden was somehow making up. This is a 4.5-page document that the War Cabinet, which includes the Prime Minister, they approved it. And they asked the United States to present it to Egypt and Qatar to present then to Hamas. So there is within this three-phase approach, there is a connection between the first phase and the second phase, where the two sides will commit to good faith negotiations. And as long as that goes on, as long as there are good faith negotiations, there would be a continuing ceasefire that connects phase one and phase two. Now, obviously, both sides, it's not just Prime Minister Netanyahu who is saying, he hasn't committed to ending the war unless Israel's objectives have been achieved. Hamas said it had a favorable view of this, provided it's going to produce the end of the war, complete Israeli withdrawal, and reconstruction. So Hamas has its maximal objectives, which it's stating in public. And what you're hearing from the Prime Minister as he comes under enormous pressure from the right within his own government is he's saying, I haven't walked away from our objectives. The truth is he hasn't walked away from those objectives, but he has approved a proposal that creates a possibility of producing an end to the war. But it will go in stages. It's not automatic. And there are difficult issues that will have to be resolved. What this proposal does is create the basis for a resumption of indirect negotiations that, in a sense, the Israelis will be talking to the Egyptians and Qataris, who will then be conveying that to Hamas. That resumption of indirect negotiations will then try to iron out what are the details. The hard details have less to do with what will go in phase one and will have more to do with how you connect phase one and phase two. I don't think anyone is saying this is automatic, but clearly a roadmap has been presented by this proposal. The Israelis showed flexibility in terms of adopting it. And what it reflected was, in fact, not the pressure from the right wing, but the pressure from the reality of hostages being held for so long and an increasing fear that if you don't get a hostage deal soon, those hostages who remain alive will not end up coming back to Israel and being alive. Many in the Israeli military right now have adopted a position that said, we failed our citizens in the southern part of Israel on October 7th. We cannot fail them again by not recovering hostages alive. That's one of the factors that's driving this. Sure, there's the pressure from the families, and that's obviously felt by everybody here, but there's a deep sense that there's a fundamental Israeli obligation to recover the hostages alive. That's what drove this proposal, and the Prime Minister of Israel adopted this proposal and approved it being presented to the United States to be presented then to the Egyptians and Qataris to trigger again what would be indirect negotiations to try to see if you could reach an agreement based on it.
And I know you are so deeply sourced within the Israeli government, the Israeli military, as well as regional players and the U.S. So given those facts, what is the most compelling pressure or tension point with Benjamin Netanyahu? Is it staying in office and satisfying his far-right allies who are holding this coalition together? Or is it responding to the hostage families, to his own military, to his defense minister Gallant, the War Cabinet, the opposition military led by Benny Gantz and others? So his country is divided. And he's very unpopular right now, but is he going to just hang on to the far right members of the coalition rather than trying to come up with another? I don't know what the answer is if this government falls. I believe I saw that one of the opposition leaders, the former Minister Lapid, said that they would not have a vote of no confidence, that they would play ball with him if he went along with this.
What the former Prime Minister Lapid said is that they would provide a safety net. If he was prepared to take on ministers Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, who have said they will bring the government down if Prime Minister goes ahead with this proposal. And I think what you see is Prime Minister Netanyahu is trying to walk a fine line between the pressure from the right and the pressure not just from the families, but from most of the country as well. There is a desire on part of everybody not to have an outcome where you don't recover the hostages and Hamas is able to somehow reconstitute itself. Those on the right basically say the most important thing is that we have to, in effect, eradicate Hamas and have a total victory. They can't define what that is. That's more a slogan than it is a practical objective. A practical objective is demilitarizing Gaza, demilitarizing Hamas, basically dismantling most of its military infrastructure. Those are practical objectives. And creating a circumstance where it becomes very difficult for Hamas to reconstitute itself because you also create an alternative to it, that's a way to ensure you achieve the objective the Prime Minister has said is most important to Israel, which I think the President of the United States agrees with. Hamas can never again be able to threaten Israel. Hamas can't resume political control in Gaza. Achieving those two objectives are key. What you hear people on the right say is they are talking about eradicating, destroying Hamas. We defeated ISIS, but we couldn't destroy it as an idea. Hamas is being defeated right now, and more will have to be done to ensure that it cannot reconstitute itself. One of the things that I think the administration will need to do in following through with this is if there's demilitarization, how do you guarantee there can't be remilitarization? How do you guarantee that reconstruction doesn't lead to materials coming into Gaza that can be diverted so that Hamas might gain control of that? There are questions related to that. There are questions related to security as you proceed. But first things first, here is a proposal that the Israelis themselves made. And I think the reason that the president gave his speech was twofold. One was to ensure that Prime Minister Netanyahu, who he knew would come under pressure from the far right in his government, would stick to this. And two was to shift the focus onto Hamas, so that Hamas has to accept what is a proposal, and so that Hamas doesn't continue to ensure that Palestinians suffer by saying no. So there was a twofold purpose, I think, with his speech, and he was addressing, in effect, the realities related to both sides.